Hey guys, we're on part 3 of Knowing God's Will. Just a reminder, we are talking about 5 attributes of God's will. So it's not kind of the 5 steps to knowing God's will, pray, read your Bible, talk to some counselors, etc. This is the attributes or the characteristics of God's will. So for example, if you blindfolded me and you put some foods in front of me and I took a bite of them, if it tasted really sweet, right, and of course chocolatey, I would know, okay, that's chocolate ice cream or that's a chocolate cake, right? Those are the aspects of it. Those are the flavors. So yeah, we're talking about the flavors of God's will, meaning, he gives us a promise, and the promise is for something in the future, and we can call that a palace. And from the promise to the palace is the process, right? It's a journey. It doesn't usually happen overnight, right? And so one reason this is really important is when you receive the promise, you can kind of test it by the flavors, by these characteristics, but also when we're in the process, it's very important to be able to test it because you want to be reassured. You want to be able to persevere, to endure, to keep going. And a great analogy, I think, is let's say you're on a subway. You're on the subway, like in Chicago, they have the L, right? And when I lived in Taipei, Taiwan, they had we call it the Jeyun. That's Chinese for subway, I think. But anyway, the last stop in Taipei, in that subway going north, is called Danshui. And so, if my destination is Danshui, and I get on, whatever stop before then, and I start going, but I get tired of being on the train, or I just think I'm never going to make it to the end, or the train keeps stopping, or it has problems, or, there's mechanical, whatever. Whatever. Or we just have to stop at every stop, and I'm tired of stopping. And I say, you know what? I'm just going to get off here. And I get off at a stop earlier than the final destination. Then what happens is I've missed out on the greater promise. I've missed out on God's best for my life. So it's important to know the attributes so that you can keep going, so that you can get to, the final promise. And actually, it's really interesting because at the end of Genesis 11, Abraham, we're talking about Abraham in this series, and Abraham's father, it says he left Ur of the Chaldeans, headed for Canaan, which who knows, Canaan ended up being the promised land. Hello. Headed for Canaan, but he stopped at Haran and settled there. He stopped completely. He didn't stop to rest. He stopped and settled there at Haran. So he was supposed to go to the end of the train, the last train stop, but he got off at an earlier one. And, it doesn't say that God told him to. So I can only guess that, he got tired of traveling or I don't know what. But anyway, it's important to know these attributes so we can keep going. So here's an attribute today. The first part was that God's going to make us weak, and he's going to take us from independence to dependence. The second one is that he's going to then build us back up. He gets rid of us so he can fill us, and then we're going to be strong again. And then the third one is that the promise is going to be so great, it's something you can't even imagine. It's something you can't even conceive of being able to see with your own eyes, certainly with your mind's eye, your imagination. So the point is, wait for that final destination. The point is, don't get off the train on an earlier stop. Have patience. Don't take the second best. You might say, don't eat the scraps that fall on the floor. Wait until he invites you to the main table. Right? Have some patience, have some perseverance. And so here's something that we see in chapter 12 and 13 of Genesis. Abraham in 12, he follows God. He doesn't know where he's going, but he leaves where he is and goes where he does not know he's going. He ends up in Egypt. He's scared of the Pharaoh. He tells the Egyptians that Sarai is not his wife, just his sister. The Pharaoh takes her, and then God gets angry. And Pharaoh gets angry at Abraham. And long story short, Abraham lacks faith in God to protect them, but God still has grace and uses the whole situation to bless Abraham in a huge way and give him tons of riches. Okay. Then in chapter 13, Abraham and Lot, his nephew, okay, and Abraham's been leading the whole time, go to this amazing land. And Lot looks around with his natural eyes And Lot gets off at a stop sooner than the final destination. Lot looks around with his natural eyes and says, whoa, part of this land looks amazing. I want that. So I want to quickly grab it. So, hey, Abraham, Uncle Abe, how about I take this and you take the bad stuff? Abraham doesn't even flinch. Abraham doesn't even worry about it, right? Abraham doesn't fight him or argue with him for it. Abraham doesn't say, I'm the one who led us here. I get first pick. Abraham is totally fine. Why? Because he went through this experience in Egypt and he understands that even when he's not perfect, God can provide riches for him and blessing for him in ways that he could never even conceive. And in time periods sooner than he could ever even imagine, right? If he'll just trust God. So this whole Lot thing, he says, sure, go for it, because he understands an attribute of God's will is that God will give greater things than we can ever imagine or that our own physical eyes can even see, right? So that's it. The point for today is when you're going through that process to the palace, don't get off early. Keep going until the promise that he gave you is fulfilled or until something comes along that's so amazing, in case you weren't clear on what the promise was, you just knew, like Abraham, he told you to go, until it's so amazing that you're like, wow, this could never be me. This is nothing I planned, nothing I worked for. It's all God. This has got to be a God thing. Wait for the greater thing. Have patience, persevere, because that's an attribute of God's will, that he's going to give you something so amazing you can't even imagine it. All right, we'll talk on part 4 tomorrow.